Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Peter, for that introduction. So good day, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in at the moment. My name is Peter Elwin. I'm Director of Fixed Income and Head of the Food and Land Use Programme at Planet Tracker. Planet Tracker, just for those of you who are not aware of us, we are a non-profit, sustainable finance think tank. We focus on using finance as the lever to transform underlying economic systems. And we produce research and other tools on nature-related risks and opportunities, particularly designed for finance professionals, but also available to corporates and indeed academics and anybody else who wants to access them on our website. Planet Tracker is part of the Tracker Group. You may also have come across our sister organisation, Carbon Tracker, which focuses particularly on the energy system and the required energy system transition. Now, Planet Tracker's work, as I said, is available on our website. It's all free to access. We cover a variety of themes, including plastics, oceans, textiles, and of course the food system, which is what I want to cover in today's talk. Now, the food system is eating itself. It is destroying the natural capital base on which it depends. From a climate perspective, it is responsible for something like a third of humanity's GHG footprint. It's having a very, very negative effect on nature. So 86% of the species on the IUCN Red List are there because of the impact of the food system. The Living Planet Index, which you may be aware of, is down 69% in the last 50 years, and much of that is as a result of the way that we produce food. Over 34% of our fish stocks are overfished, just as an example of what a negative impact it is having actually on the way that it creates protein for individuals. And even worse than that, around about a fifth, 20% of global deaths are due to dietary factors. That's an extraordinary statistic. So the food system is not only destroying the natural capital base on which it depends, but it's not actually succeeding in providing good food to all the people in the way they actually need it. And on top of all that, it's incredibly wasteful. Around about a third of the food that we actually produce never makes it into the mouths of the people that it's designed to feed. And that inefficiency is even more fundamental than that. When you actually look at how we use the land that we actually devote to agriculture to produce food for humanity, nearly half of the habitable land is used to produce food, 45% by current estimates, with a small amount for food, for fibres and fuel. But about 80% of that land is used to support the production of meat, which only accounts for around 17% of our calories globally, 38% of our protein. So under 20% of our calories come from 80% of our land. That's massively inefficient and completely unsustainable, particularly when we need to use land to provide nature-based solutions to our conjoined climate and nature crises. And what is even worse is that the food system itself is threatened by the very climate change that is helping to drive. If you take maize as an example, lots of different studies about the impact of climate change on different crops. Maize is a good one to look at because it constitutes 40% of the cereals that we produce globally, so it's a very significant food source. Now, when you look at this map, you can see the red areas are the areas where maize production, maize yields will be severely impacted by climate change, potentially very, very significantly. The really deep red areas, that's a more than 40% drop-off in yields. That's a massive decline in yield productivity across the world. And if you look at the map, you can see that that's most of the land mass that can be devoted to maize production. Climate change negatively impacts the vast majority of the areas that can be used to produce maize. Now, there are a couple of areas north of 60 degrees latitude terms and south of 30 degrees, where yields might actually increase as a result of climate change. But you can see the actual land mass available there is really, really tiny. So overall, output will fall significantly. Now, nature can help with climate change, but only if we can actually allocate land to doing that. So recent studies have shown that around 20 nature-based climate solutions could mitigate over a third of humanity's GHG emissions, but that assumes the food system does not expand its current land footprint. And that's, of course, in spite of the fact that we need to feed a growing population with more and better food. Now, if you look at the list of solutions that have been examined here, you can see that reforestation and avoided forest conversion are the two biggest by an absolute country mile in terms of their sort of efficacy in terms of absorbing carbon and acting as a nature-based solution. So deforestation is one of the biggest challenges to this. If we can stop deforestation, we have a massive, massive positive effect on our carbon footprint and on our ability to absorb the carbon we generate from human activities. But of course, the food system, and particularly meat production, is one of the biggest drivers of deforestation across the world. So, what's the role of private finance in all of this? Well, we estimate private finance provides around about 8.6 trillion of funding to the food system. That's a very, very large amount of money. So private finance has a very significant role to play. But at the moment, particularly when you look at finance that relates to climate mitigation and climate adaptation, so climate finance, it's not focused on the food system. Around about 80% of current climate finance goes to energy and transport-related projects, and only around 2% is going to projects that relate to the food system. So there's a huge volume of capital that really needs to sort of shift in favour of transforming the food system if we're going to meet our climate and nature challenges. So what can financial institutions do? Well, about a year ago, we published a financial markets roadmap for financial institutions to provide them with a guide to transforming the global food system, to show them what they could do, the way that they could participate in this required transformation. There are 4 components to the strategy that we've set out in this document. Responsible supply chains, one of the absolute crucial elements of transformation. Companies need to understand what's going on both above them in the supply chain, up to the producers, and also what's going on further down the supply chain with their customers and ultimately consumers at the other end. They need to take responsibility for that, and financial institutions can support them in doing that. Increased efficiency, but notice it's increased true cost efficiency. It's looking at the food system from a true cost perspective, including all the things that are often regarded as externalities by current economic models. So we need the food system to produce more food. We need it to use less land. We need it to be much more lighter footed when it comes to nature, and obviously producing far, far fewer GHG emissions. And that goes on to the third theme, the reduced pollution. Obviously, GHG emissions need to come down significantly, particularly methane. The food system produces more methane than the energy system. Methane is an incredibly warming gas, around about 80 times more than carbon dioxide. So if we can stop methane emissions from the food system, we'll have a very, very strong effect on humanity's climate warming impact. Similarly, plastic. Food system produces a lot of plastic, or uses a lot of plastic, and then leaves it lying in the fields. Nitrogen from fertilizers, significant challenge to watercourses in terms of eutrophication. Pesticides, having a very, very big impact on nature and particularly on pollinators. And then antimicrobials. Around 3/4 of antimicrobials are used for animals, raised for food, and most of that usage is actually for non-therapeutic purposes. So there's a huge risk that we are laying ourselves open to antimicrobial resistance and all the challenges associated with that. And then finally, sustainable product offerings. Now, a lot of the time when people are talking about the food system, they talk about consumers and consumer behavior. We think companies should be taking responsibility for the food they produce, and financial institutions should be holding them accountable for the ways that they produce the food, the sorts of food they're producing, the way they market it, ultimately the way they configure the food environment, either to persuade us to do good things to our bodies with the food, or of course, currently to persuade us to do unhealthy things. Now, the food system is complicated, but the food system is also very concentrated. Power is concentrated in the hands of relatively few companies, and that creates a big opportunity for financial institutions to really exercise leverage over the system. As part of the work for this roadmap, we analysed 400,000 companies from 160 countries, capturing total revenues of around about $10.2 trillion US dollars, which we think is somewhere in the region of 50 to 70% of the total revenues of the system. So that's 15 to 19 trillion for the whole system. And the whole system value, we think, is somewhere in the region of $14 trillion. Now, when you look at the profits and the revenues in the system, you can see that the revenues are distributed. The biggest chunk of revenue, the sort of the greatest activity, if you like, is in the manufacturing and distributing area of the food system. So food production, quite a lot of revenues there, about a quarter, but nearly 50% going to manufacturing, and then the other 25% going to the sort of retail and food service end of the supply chain. When you look at profits, however, you see a very, very different picture, and this may not be a surprise to many of you who understand the food system. The profits are not going to the producers, about 14% across our universe of companies. But of course, a lot of that will be captured by the really large producers and not by the small ones. Over a third going to manufacturers and distributors, but look how much of the profit is being captured by the downstream end of the system. 50% is being captured by retailers and food service companies. So very unequal distribution. And when you look at the concentration side of things, fewer than 4,000 listed companies in our database. That's 0.001% of the global food system total sort of universe of businesses. So a tiny, tiny proportion by number. They account for half of the system's value and over a quarter of the system's revenue, and very likely an even larger portion of the actual profits. A part of the challenge that we currently face with the food system is that the funding, the financing, is not going to where it needs to. So as you can see from this heat map, most of the funding is going to the manufacturers and distributors, the sort of the middle area of the food system supply chain. About a fifth is going to retailers and food service companies, and then the other sort of fifth to a quarter is going to producers and traders. But a lot of that is bank finance. It's not actually equity investment. So it's not sharing the risks. It's simply putting the risk on the producer and taking the returns from the loans that are being provided. So we need to see a shift of capital upstream, away from the manufacturers and to the producers, so that they can actually be empowered to make the changes that are necessary. So what are the changes that financial institutions can really support? One of the features of our conversations with financial institutions is they'll look at our strategic framework and say, wow, yep, that's impressive. We'd love to do that, but that'll take time. What can we do now? What can I do as an individual financial investor in my fund with my lending book? How can I really begin to prioritize climate and nature through the food system? Well, there are 6 things that we've identified. There are potentially many more that you could talk about. These are 6 that are very achievable by financial institutions. They have real influence over the way that the system works from a corporate perspective. And if these are undertaken, they will have a really big positive impact on the food system's climate and nature footprint. Fully traceable supply chains builds on that broad strategic imperative to have responsibility for your supply chains. This, of course, is potentially profitable, because if you are a company that actually understands what's going on in your supply chain, then you can reduce risk. You can ensure that the quality of the product coming into your factory is actually as you want it. You can stop fraud. You can really capture the benefits of the business that you're doing by taking responsibility for what's going on in your supply chain, as well as monitoring your GHG and nature footprint and ensuring proper labour rights and all of those good things as well. Halving food loss and waste. That's very obviously a massive waste through the system. Simply cutting waste is clearly, again, going to be profitable. Stopping deforestation, we've already seen how important that is from a climate perspective and indeed a nature perspective. Deforestation is the equivalent of smashing up the air conditioning unit that is keeping humanity safe. Cutting methane emissions. Again, we talked about how important that is from a climate perspective. So there are a number of really important actions that financial institutions can support to reduce the food system's footprint. But there's more. Making agricultural systems and aquaculture systems regenerative. The food system is one of the few economic systems where, if you actually run it properly, the capital base on which you depend gets more productive, not less. It doesn't depreciate, it actually appreciates. It grows in strength. There's clearly huge opportunities there. And then alternative proteins. We could devote hours and hours to discussing that. But again, massive opportunities from finding different ways to produce food that have a much lighter land use footprint. And the benefits from this, if you did all of these things and if everybody collaborated, you could potentially reduce humanity's footprint by nearly 20%, sort of 10 gigatons of CO2 equivalent from that. That's obviously a bit of a guess, but it's very much in line with a lot of the academic studies that are around at the moment. The potential is absolutely enormous. So, what can we conclude? Well, the climate and nature crises are interlinked. We cannot solve one without addressing the other. We've got to do transformation of the food system in order to address both. Now, if we transform the food system, we will transform the health and the welfare of millions of people across the planet. We'll make a significant contribution to alleviating global warming, and we'll begin to restore nature and free up land to support the new bioeconomy, to enable humanity to move away from an economy based on extractive practices, petrochemicals, to one which is fundamentally based on renewable resources and based on nature. And as a result of all of that, we will unleash significant economic benefits. So we all have a role to play as finance professionals, as consumers, and above all as citizens of the only planet that we have. There is no planet B, so let's work to save the home we have.